Welcome to the Philosophy of Today. I'm Jim Hammond. In the last video, I said that the biggest question in philosophy is, what do we trust, the mind or the soul, the reason or the intuition, consciousness or the unconscious? I tried to explain how the philosophy of today trusts the soul, the intuition, the unconscious. And this is apparent in many different spheres. For example, morality, intellectual life, athletics, art. In many different spheres, the philosophy of today trusts the soul, the intuition, the unconscious. Another question that's just as important as the question of what do we trust is the question, is the universe a mechanism made up of separate pieces, or is it an organism made up of interconnected pieces? This question is so important that you might say it's more important than the old question of does God exist? Because this general feeling about the universe is, in a sense, comes before our conception of God and influences our conception of God. One might say our conception of God is a byproduct of our general feeling about the universe. So this question of is the universe a mechanism or an organism, I think is a very important one. The philosophy of today says that the universe is an organism made up of interconnected pieces, pieces that are often connected by mysterious and occult means. The people who believe that the universe is an organism are usually the same people who say that we should trust the soul, the unconscious, the intuition. On the other hand, the people who believe that the universe is a mechanism are usually the same people who say that we should trust the reason, the mind, the consciousness. So our view of human nature is related to and connected to our view of the universe. These two views, in turn, are related to our conception of God. So the whole philosophy is, in a sense, of a piece. Our view of the individual, our view of the universe, and our view of God. Those three elements tend to link together or dovetail or agree with each other. So a rational philosopher like Aristotle would say that reason is man's best tool, man's most valuable gift. And he would say that God is a rational being who built the universe in a deliberate, rational way as an architect would build a house. So the rational side of Aristotle influences his view of God, his view of human nature, his view of the universe. So what sort of people believe in the unconscious and the interconnected universe? What schools of philosophy, what societies, what historical periods believe in those two things, the unconscious and the interconnected universe? I would say there's 7 schools or 7 societies that tend to believe those two things. Number 1 is primitive man. We've talked about this before, how primitive man believes in occult connections between objects that were once in close contact. He believes that the mind can affect the external world. He believes the universe is interconnected. Number 2 is the Hermetic tradition, which begins with the Gnostics around 200 AD and includes the alchemists who worked in the Middle Ages. The Hermetic tradition never completely died away. It took different forms in different historical periods, such as the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons. Some of the Romantic thinkers like Poe or Coleridge could be part of the Hermetic tradition. Number 3 is Chinese philosophy, which looks for acausal connections, occult connections, for example, between the death of an emperor and an earthquake. Chinese philosophy looks for clusters of things that like to occur together rather than causes. It doesn't see A leads to B, which leads to C, but A, B, and C tend to arise together. Sort of like the doctrine from India of mutual arising. The Chinese philosophy is a philosophy of synchronicity or mutual arising as opposed to causality. Number 4 would be Renaissance philosophy, especially the Italian philosophers like Bruno and Campanella. They see everything as interconnected, everything is alive. they take a rather dim view of Aristotle. Number 5 is Shakespeare, a contemporary of Bruno. We talked before about how Shakespeare believes in interconnected universe, believes in what might be called synchronicity or the doctrine of mutual arising. The critic who brings out this Hermetic side of Shakespeare is a critic named Wilson Knight. Number 6 would be Jung, who believes in synchronicity. He developed that theory of synchronicity. He coined the term synchronicity. Synchronicity stresses acausal connections between things, what they call meaningful connections between man and nature. Meaningful but not causal connections. Number 7, last but not least, is quantum physics. We've talked about how quantum physics sees occult connections between distant objects, what might be called telepathic connections. I'm sure the scientists would shrink from using the word occult, so I'll use the word telepathic. Particles that are paired or together, spinning in the same way, if you separate them even by 1,000 miles and you change the spin of one, the spin of the other changes right away. That's called the aspect experiment or the EPR effect. So these are the 7 things that tend to, the 7 schools of thought or 7 disciplines which tend to believe in the unconscious and the interconnected universe, what might be called the philosophy of today. We've talked about how modern scientists like Einstein and Feynman are unable to connect quantum physics to their everyday world, to their own experience. They find it strange and baffling. They don't seem to realize that the telepathic aspect of quantum physics resembles what we see in our everyday world, what we find in imaginative literature. We discussed how telepathy plays an important role in a lot of novels, such as the novels of J.D. Salinger, Arthur Conan Doyle, and many others. Scientists like Einstein and Feynman, they don't realize that the interconnected, holistic aspect of quantum physics is what we find in Eastern philosophy, in the plays of Shakespeare, in the psychology of Jung. So I think studying the humanities and even our everyday life is a good way of approaching quantum physics. And if we do that, we don't find it quite as baffling, quite as shocking as scientists did. Feynman, the American physicist Richard Feynman, he said that all the mysteries of quantum physics can be seen in the double-slit experiment. He said, if you can come to terms with the double-slit experiment, then the battle is more than half over, since any other situation in quantum mechanics, it turns out, can always be explained by saying, you remember the case of the experiment with the 2 holes? It's the same thing. I would say that the best epitome of quantum physics is the paired particles experiment or the aspect experiment that I mentioned before. However, Feynman takes a somewhat different view. He thinks that the double-slit experiment is a good epitome of quantum physics. So let's talk a little about the double-slit experiment, which Feynman thinks is so important. There are 3 parts to this experiment. Number 1, a particle gun that fires particles. Number 2, a wall with 2 slits in it. And number 3, a backstop or detector that detects where the particles strike. We find that if we close one of the 2 slits, the particles pass through the open slit as we would expect, and as any objects would, as bullets, for example, would. However, if we open both slits, then the particles begin to act like waves, and they land against the backstop as waves would land. Where the crests of the waves combine, the particles land in a bunch, and where the troughs of the waves combine, no particles land. There's a blank area on the backstop. So this is called an interference pattern. It's typical of wave behavior. One might call it a striped pattern, a zebra pattern. So what's going on? Are the particles from the 2 slits somehow bumping or influencing each other? Let's try to eliminate the possibility of bumping by firing just one particle at a time. If both slits are open and we fire one particle at a time, the same interference pattern gradually emerges, as if the particle knows that both slits are open. If we observe the slits to see which one the particle is passing through, the particle goes back to behaving like a bullet, no interference pattern, as if it knows that we're watching. So one science writer, John Gribben, who wrote a book called In Search of Schrodinger's Cat, Quantum Physics and Reality. John Gribben said the electrons not only know whether or not both holes are open, they know whether or not we're watching them, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. The quantum world, according to John Gribben, is holistic. The parts are, in some sense, in touch with the whole. We must accept that literally everything is connected to everything else. Now here's a guy, John Gribben, who's not influenced by Eastern philosophy. He's not receptive to New Age theories or anything like that. He's just a scientist, and he sees the holistic aspect of quantum physics, and he sees the way that everything is connected to everything else. So Feynman thought that this holistic world was very strange. It was utterly unlike our everyday world, but I would say it's strikingly similar to our world. Here are three examples of the holistic character of our world. Number one, we have telepathy, which we've talked about before, which shows how everything is connected and everything is a part of a whole, especially things that used to be close to each other, such as twins or a mother and child. So telepathy is an example of the holistic character of our everyday world. Number two is the phenomena of Renaissance and decadence. My theory of history says that society is an organism and society is holistic. People are knit together by a shared instinct, a shared life instinct in the case of a Renaissance society, and a shared death instinct in the case of a decadent society. My theory builds on Hegel's theory of society as an organism. My theory says that a moment in time has a particular character limited to that society, such as Renaissance character or decadent character. And the third example I'd like to give of the holistic character of the world is Shakespeare's world. And I'd like to read a passage from Julius Caesar. This is a particularly good passage, I think, for showing the holistic nature of Shakespeare's world. He talks about the weather being in sync with the behavior of animals. Everything is moving together, moving in step, so to speak. It's almost as if he put this passage into Julius Caesar in order to make my job easier, in a sense, to express his idea of the universe, express his holistic conception of the universe. I have seen tempests when the scolding winds have rived the knotty oaks, but never till tonight did I go through a tempest dropping fire. Against the Capitol I met a lion who glared upon me and went surly by without annoying me. Men all in fire walk up and down the streets, and yesterday the bird of night did sit even at noonday upon the marketplace, hooting and shrieking. When these prodigies do so conjointly meet, let not men say, these are their reasons, they are natural, for I believe they are portentous things unto the climate that they point upon. Indeed, it is a strange disposed time. So he's using the word conjointly as opposed to Jung, who uses the term synchronicity, but it's the same idea that things of a similar character or similar nature tend to occur together or happen at the same time. So is Shakespeare just telling a tale, or is he expressing a worldview? Some people would say that he's not expressing a worldview, he's just trying to create a dramatic story. My view is that he's creating a dramatic story, but he's also expressing his view of the world. John Keats said, there's a quality that went to form a man of achievement, especially in literature, and which Shakespeare possessed so enormously. I mean negative capability, That is, when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. So what Keats is saying is what I'm saying about Shakespeare, that he had the ability to rest in uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts instead of trying to give everything a rational explanation. He admitted that there was much about the universe that we could not understand, and he dwelled on these mysterious aspects of the universe. So the bottom line for a holistic view of the universe is that the world is one, unus mundus. Hence the ancients, the Greeks and Romans, they observed the flight of birds to obtain clues about their own destiny. Before embarking on a project such as a military campaign or the founding of a new colony, they would observe the flight of birds, the position of stars, and other phenomena. Since everything is connected, anything can give you a clue about anything else. For centuries, rational philosophers have scorned soothsayers and scorned the practice of observing the flight of birds. Perhaps we should have more respect for ancient practices such as soothsaying or other such things. So physics experiments can demonstrate telepathic phenomena, occult phenomena, holistic phenomena. Can experiments also demonstrate occult phenomena in our everyday world? I would say they can, and I would cite a book by Dean Radin called The Conscious Universe, The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena. Dean Radin has written several books about experiments related to the occult. His specialty is testing occult phenomena with very careful scientific experiments. And I heard Dean Radin speak in Providence a couple of years ago. He often gets invited to the Naval War College in Newport, and he speaks to the Navy because they're interested in unconventional thinking, and they're interested in what might be called out-of-the-box thinking. So they invite him quite often to speak in Newport. So he speaks in Providence on his way to Newport. He has spoken a couple times in Providence. So Dean Radin's book shows that occult phenomena can be proven through careful experiment. Laboratories were set up at Duke and Princeton, and they conducted these sorts of experiments. The laboratory at Duke was called the Rhine Research Center, and the laboratory at Princeton was called PEAR, P-E-A-R, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. So it's definitely possible to prove occult phenomena with scientific experiments. The problem is that people have a closed mind about the occult, and they're just not willing to look at the evidence. So I think the big problem is not the scientific proof, it's opening people's minds to the possibility that the occult has some validity, and therefore it needs further study. So what did Duke and what did Princeton do with these two places, the Rhine Research Center and the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research? They tried to separate these institutes from the universities because they have so much hostility to the occult. They're so uncomfortable with it. They don't want to have it anywhere near their university. So Duke tried to separate itself from the Rhine Research Center, and Princeton closed down the engineering anomalies. By the way, if you want to give any feedback on the show, we have an email address, which is today@ljhammond.com, and there's a website, ljhammond.com/today. If you go to that website, you'll get more information about the people that we're discussing. So we're interested in quantum physics, in particles, while the Renaissance Hermetists were interested in astrology, in celestial objects, and they knew nothing of particles. So the question arises, does the modern-day Hermetist have any interest in celestial objects? Is he at all interested in astrology or receptive to astrology? One way to think about astrology is to say that a particular moment in time has a particular character, which seems to be manifested in human behavior, animal behavior, the weather, celestial behavior such as meteors and comets and stuff like that. This is what Shakespeare depicts, a holistic world. My own experience has given me some respect for astrology. I read my own horoscope and I found it to be strikingly accurate. I didn't have any special expert draw up a horoscope. I just went online to a very common sort of astrology website, and I read my horoscope and found it to be amazingly accurate. Jung was receptive to both kinds of astrology, what we might call the little astrology and the big astrology. When I say little astrology, I mean a horoscope that tells something about a person's personality based on the zodiac sign under which they were born. So that would be what I call the little astrology. The big astrology talks about the personality of a whole civilization, and that has to do with the precession of the equinoxes, which happens like once in 1,000 years. So if you had a cycle of 12 zodiac signs, it might be 12,000 years, what might be called a great year. So this is why people talk about the age of Aquarius, that we're at the dawn of the age of Aquarius, that the age of Christianity, when Christianity arose, was the Pisces. Alexander the Great was under Aries. So different zodiac signs are related to different historical epochs according to the precession of the equinoxes. So this is what might be called the big astrology, and Jung was receptive to both kinds. Jung was receptive to the little astrology and the big astrology. So he tried to make predictions about our civilization based on the big astrology, the position of stars in certain zodiac signs. As far as the little astrology is concerned, Jung, if he had trouble understanding a patient, he would have his horoscope drawn, and he felt that the little astrology was relevant to his work as a psychologist, that it helped him to understand people. So I think the philosophy of today will take a new look at sciences that have been rejected, such as astrology, phrenology, mesmerism, etc. These sciences may have been too hastily rejected by thinkers who were too rational. And so I think it's time that we take a second look at these sciences. So that's all for today, and thank you for watching.